So picture a Roman senator. He's walking slowly through this abandoned, just echoing forum.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right? Statues of long-dead emperors are, looming overhead. But the whole bustling center of the known world is just completely hollowed out. Or imagine a Soviet citizen.
Freezing in the winter air.
Exactly. Hands freezing, tearing down this massive bronze statue of Lenin, a monument they've walked past and literally revered their entire life.
Yeah, or even a lone figure on Easter Island, just staring out at a totally deforested wasteland.
Yes, staring at a violently toppled Moai statue. These are, they're incredibly vivid cinematic moments. But the thing that ties them all together is the exact same underlying truth.
Which is that hierarchies feel completely eternal right up until the exact day they aren't.
Exactly. And that brings us to what we're getting into today. Welcome to this custom deep dive. Our mission today, and I'm really excited about this one, is to completely map out the anatomy of societal collapse.
It's a huge topic.
It is. We are going to decode the exact mechanics of how and why massive power structures fall. We'll look at the real-world history of fallen empires and the profound psychological freefall that hits the citizens the morning after.
Right. The morning after is when the reality actually sets in.
Yeah. And to tie it all together, we're going to use the fictional world of San Vitae, specifically the crumbling, super oppressive Sanitary hierarchy from that universe. We're using it as a backdrop for our exploration today.
It's honestly a fantastic lens. It really helps you, the listener, understand your own relationship with power and order and authority.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So to kick us off, what's the first thing we need to understand about how a collapse actually happens?
Well, the most crucial thing to grasp right out of the gate is that a collapse is almost never a sudden explosion. I mean, we tend to think of revolutions as these spontaneous flashes of lightning, right?
Like storming the palace, burning the flag, that kind of thing.
Exactly, but that's just the final outward symptom. The actual collapse is, it's a prolonged condition. It's a slow, largely invisible process.
So it's rotting from the inside out.
Right. And once the underlying belief in the system decays beyond a certain point, the physical collapse becomes entirely inevitable. Humanity builds these massive, towering systems of social order, and we live inside them for so long that we teach ourselves they are simply the natural, unchangeable state of the universe.
The rules are just the rules.
Exactly. Until, seemingly out of nowhere, the whole thing just falls apart.
Okay, let's unpack this, because it's not a single moment in time. Like you said, it's a chronic condition. And to see the mechanics of that condition clearly, we actually have 3 distinct historical case studies in front of us.
3 totally different civilizations.
Right. 3 completely different triggers for collapse, but all destroyed by the illusion of their own permanence. I want to start with Rome, because, that's the one everyone thinks they know.
The empire that was just too heavy to hold itself.
Exactly. I'm looking at the notes here on how that weight actually accumulated. It wasn't just that they got big, it's how they managed getting big.
Yeah.
The administrative bloat just seems like it was suffocating.
Oh, it was. Rome is the classic example, not just because of its scale, but because it proves this really vital sociological rule, which is you don't need to be conquered by an outside force to be destroyed.
Right. Rome was crushed by the sheer mathematics of its own internal weight.
Yeah. When an empire expands to that massive size, the cost of simply maintaining the borders becomes astronomical.
So they have to raise money.
Right. The state has to extract more and more resources from its citizens, so taxes go through the roof. And that causes deep economic stratification. The middle class just evaporates.
You end up with a massive, impoverished lower class.
Exactly. And an elite class that completely insulates itself from the consequences of the poverty they are creating. They retreat into absolute luxury.
Wow. And when the elites check out like that, the social contract breaks.
It completely shatters.
The average Roman citizen looks around and realizes, hey, the system is no longer providing security or prosperity for me. It's just a machine designed to extract my labor. Which, that explains the shift in the military, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because I was reading that the army essentially stopped protecting the borders and started functioning more like a domestic political tool. How did that flip happen?
Well, it's a direct consequence of that broken social contract. When the populace no longer believes in the authority of the state has to enforce its authority through violence.
So the emperors are basically constantly bribing their own generals just to stay loyal.
Exactly. The military became the only institution that actually mattered. It essentially operated like an organized crime syndicate, extracting wealth from the populace to keep the emperor on the throne.
That's crazy.
Yeah, the hierarchy simply couldn't justify its own existence to the people anymore. The belief evaporated long before the physical gates of Rome fell.
So the picture that's forming here, it isn't really the classic cliche of a hollow tree blowing over in the wind.
Not at all.
It feels much more like a massive Jenga tower.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Yeah. The elites at the top keep pulling blocks from the bottom. They extract civic trust. They pull out economic resources. They tax the lower classes, all just to build the tower higher and higher.
Right. And from the outside, the tower looks taller and more imposing than it ever has.
But its structural integrity is completely gone. Just a tiny bump to the table brings the whole thing crashing down.
The Jenga analogy is highly accurate, specifically because the people at the top of the tower are completely blind to the missing blocks at the bottom.
Right.
But, what happens when the blocks you're pulling are the literal physical resources keeping your population alive? That is what happened on Easter Island.
The Rapa Nui Society.
Mm-mm.
Man, this one is genuinely haunting.
It really is.
We all know the images of those monumental Moai statues, the giant stone heads facing inward toward the island.
Right.
They were operating under these strict clan-based hierarchies, and the entire society was focused on this intense ritual competition for prestige.
Yeah, the chiefs proved their power by building bigger and bigger statues.
And the mechanism of their collapse shows us what happens when resource extraction becomes practically a religion.
Exactly. To carve, transport, and actually erect those massive stone statues, they needed rolling logs. They needed immense amounts of timber and rope.
Which means they had to cut down the trees.
Right. Over generations, they systematically deforested their own island just to fuel the status competition.
Which triggers a cascading ecological failure.
Complete failure.
Because without trees, they couldn't build the canoes needed for deep water fishing. And without the tree roots, the topsoil eroded, which devastated their agriculture.
Yeah, they depleted the very resources required to keep their own population alive, just to serve the vanity of the hierarchy.
It's so tragic.
It really is. And as the starvation and systemic strain set in, that rigid, highly structured social order dissolved into brutal conflict. The Jenga tower fell because they literally burned the blocks.
So the statues themselves are left standing as these haunting physical symbols of a system that completely consumed itself.
The elites starved right alongside the commoners.
Wow. Now, if Easter Island was physical starvation, that feels like a natural bridge to our third example, the Soviet Union. Because this is much more recent, and again, no foreign invasion brought them down.
Right.
But they didn't run out of trees. They ran out of belief.
Exactly. The Soviet collapse is basically a masterclass in ideological exhaustion. You had a system suffering from deep economic stagnation and absolute bureaucratic paralysis.
The mechanisms of the state were just so rigid.
So rigid and centralized that they literally couldn't adapt to reality.
Right. I mean, you had literal breadlines in 1991, while the state television insisted everything was completely fine and production quotas were being exceeded.
Yeah, and that cognitive dissonance is exactly what breaks a society. When the gap between the official narrative of the hierarchy and the lived reality of the citizen becomes too wide, the ideological faith is fatal.
It just snaps.
It does. The Soviet Union was held together by a shared belief in a very specific future. When it became undeniable that the future wasn't coming, and, rising national identities began to fracture the supposed unity of the bloc, the hierarchy just dissolved.
The belief died, and the state fractured along with it.
Precisely.
So we have the Jenga tower falling in three different ways. We've got administrative bloat in Rome, resource exhaustion on Easter Island, and ideological collapse in the Soviet Union.
Right.
But as you mentioned earlier, when that tower falls, the physical damage is obvious. What I really want to know is, what happens to the people?
The people on the ground?
Yeah, the people who built their entire lives, their entire identities inside that tower. What happens to them?
Well, that is the terrifying part of the equation. And it leads us straight into the neurological and psychological shock of sudden freedom. In sociology, this is often called existential vertigo.
Existential vertigo.
Okay.
To ground this for you listening right now, imagine waking up tomorrow morning, you check your phone, only to discover that money simply has no value anymore.
Just completely gone.
Right. Your bank account, your mortgage, your salary, it's all completely meaningless. What is your very first physical instinct? It's not joy.
No, definitely not.
It's pure biological panic.
Yes, because your brain suddenly has absolutely no framework to process reality. For most of human history, your identity wasn't something you chose. It was something you inherited from the hierarchy.
Right? Your tribe, your caste, your occupation.
Exactly. The system provided your identity. So when the system vanishes overnight, people suffer a profound identity crisis. They literally ask, who am I without the system, and what rules apply to me now?
Because the question of what is safe
Yeah.
suddenly has no answer at all.
And this isn't just a philosophical crisis. It is a deeply biological one. Without an external structure telling you how to live, every single choice you make becomes overwhelming.
Because the stakes are so high.
Exactly. Fear and cognitive overload just take over. The nervous system enters survival mode, causing threat perception to spike. So chaos isn't just a political state.
It becomes a neurological condition.
Yes.
Which brings us right into the world of San Vitae, the awakening. This is the book we're using as a backdrop.
Yeah.
And it is such a brilliant parallel for this very concept.
It really is perfect for this.
You have the San Vitae hierarchy. They're this ancient, brutal ruling class that essentially view themselves as immortal gods.
Right.
And they are facing the exact same symptoms of collapse we just covered. Resource strain, a decaying ideology, and rising dissent from the lower castes.
The Santaries are a perfect example of how extended, unquestioned power causes profound cognitive distortion. The ruling council has lived for centuries,
Right.
and as a result, they suffer from existential boredom and a complete erosion of empathy. They're entirely detached from the consequences of their cruelty.
Yeah.
And the way they maintain order isn't just through physical force, but through a psychological panopticon.
Okay, hold on. I want to pause right there. You just used the term psychological panopticon.
Yes.
For the person listening right now who might not be a sociology major, what does that actually look like on the ground for the citizens in the world of San Vitae?
Well, a panopticon was originally a prison design where the cells are arranged in a circle around a central guard tower.
Okay.
The trick is the prisoners can never see inside the tower, so they never know exactly when they are being watched.
Oh, wow.
Right. Because they might be watched at any given second, they police their own behavior.
That is insidious.
It really is. In San Vitae, the Santery enforce rituals so omnipresent and brutal that violence becomes completely normalized. The oppressed groups, the human citizens known as the humanis, and the lower tier beings called the Sans Vitae, they internalize the oppression.
So they basically police themselves.
Exactly. They police themselves because the fear of the Santery is inside their own heads.
That learned helplessness is just the ultimate control mechanism. But then you have the protagonist of this story, Kyrian.
Right, Carrion.
He experiences this awakening, and he rejects the Santery theology entirely. He rejects their ideology and their morality. And what the dossiers point out is that his rebellion isn't just physical.
No, it's not.
It is the psychological spark that destabilizes the entire panopticon.
Exactly. When Kurian realizes the gods are human-made, the laws are human-made, the hierarchy is human-made, he shatters the illusion.
Right.
And suddenly, the citizens around him face that total identity collapse we talked about. He forces them to experience existential vertigo.
But here's where I want to push back on this, or at least look at it from the average citizen's perspective.
Okay.
Think about it. If a corrupt, wildly oppressive system, like the Santery or Imperial Rome, or a terrible dictatorial regime today, if it finally falls,
Yeah.
shouldn't people be thrilled? Shouldn't this massive influx of new freedom feel like an overwhelming relief rather than a panic attack?
I mean, it's a highly logical assumption from the outside, but it completely ignores the reality of the human brain.
Yeah.
What you're brushing up against is a phenomenon known as nostalgia for stability.
Nostalgia for stability.
Right. Human beings desperately long for predictability. We crave familiar roles and clear authority. Our brains are wired by evolution to avoid uncertainty at almost any cost.
Wow.
Consequently, even an oppressive system feels safer to the human nervous system than total, unstructured freedom.
Because in the oppressive system, you at least know where the physical and social walls are. You know the rules of the game.
Exactly. You know how to avoid getting hit, even if you are essentially living in a cage.
But when the walls vanish, you don't know where the predators are anymore.
That's precisely it. When the cage disappears, the cognitive overload of having to define your own reality, to basically become your own final authority, is often unbearable.
Yeah.
Which is why humans are instinctively driven to find an immediate cure for that vertigo.
And the most readily available cure is almost always building another cage.
Yes.
which leads us to the vacuum effect and humanity's desperate rush to rebuild the exact hierarchies that just failed them. Nature abhors a vacuum.
And so do human societies. The vacuum effect is incredibly predictable.
Right.
When a hierarchy collapses, the power structure empties out. Immediately, opportunists rise, extremists mobilize, and new elites rapidly form to fill the void.
We see this vividly in San Vitae.
We do. As the Sanitary system fractures, the elites desperately cling to whatever power they have left, while new factions immediately scramble to emerge and assert dominance over the confused populace.
So for the person listening to this right now, this vacuum effect isn't just about ancient emperors and fictional governments falling.
No, not at all.
It's the exact same psychological reason why, if a department head gets fired unexpectedly on a Tuesday,
By Wednesday morning, everyone in the office is engaging in brutal, toxic politics to figure out the new pecking order.
exactly.
Yeah, the scale changes, but the human mechanism is identical. Sociologically speaking, there are 4 specific reasons why humans reconstruct hierarchy almost immediately after a collapse, whether it's an empire or an office department.
Okay, let's walk through those because this really decodes so much of our daily behavior.
Yeah.
The first one you touched on earlier is just the sheer exhaustion of freedom.
Right.
A hierarchy drastically reduces our cognitive load.
Right. It simplifies decisions, roles, and expectations. You don't have to decide what is right and wrong every single day. The system tells you.
You outsource your moral and practical decision-making.
Exactly.
So if it reduces my mental load, I assume it also dramatically lowers my anxiety because I know what to expect tomorrow, which would be the second reason.
Exactly. Hierarchy creates predictability. In a structured system, people know exactly who leads, who follows, and what rules apply.
And that calms everything down.
Right, that predictability calms the amygdala. It lowers the hypervigilance and threat standing that kicks in during a collapse.
And that leads directly into the third reason, emotional security. Because knowing the boss is a tyrant is still somehow better for our nerves than not knowing who the boss is today.
It sounds counterintuitive, but it's true.
Order just fundamentally feels safer than freedom. Freedom means you are entirely responsible for your own survival and your own failures. Order means someone else is driving the bus, even if they are driving it right off a cliff.
That is a brutally accurate way to frame it. You trade the hard, terrifying work of independence for the familiar comfort of subjugation.
Wow.
And then there's the fourth, highly practical reason. Hierarchy acts as a social technology. It is simply a highly efficient way to organize labor, allocate resources, and resolve conflicts.
Right.
Without it, you have to rely on consensus, which, as history shows, is incredibly slow and requires a massive amount of shared interpersonal trust.
Which is the one thing you absolutely do not have right after a society falls apart. Trust is completely gone.
Exactly.
So you look at these 4 forces, reducing cognitive load, ensuring predictability, providing emotional security, and utilizing an efficient social technology. And it makes total sense why we keep rushing to build new pyramids.
It really does.
It's like breaking up with a highly toxic partner, only to immediately rush into a new relationship with someone who has the exact same red flags, just because you can't stand the anxiety of being alone in your own apartment.
Societal rebound relationships. As the research in our dossiers points out, collapse destroys the structure, but not the human need for structure. When belief dies, the system dies. But the psychological craving for order survives the ruins completely intact.
But that raises a massive philosophical debate.
It does.
If we are biologically and sociologically doomed to keep rebuilding these pyramids, how should we ultimately judge the cycle of collapse? If we are just going to build Rome again or, install a new version of the Sanitary again, what is the actual point of the fall?
That is the core question that philosophers and historians have debated for centuries. When we look at the philosophy of collapse, there are essentially 3 main arguments for what a collapse actually represents in the grand scheme of human history.
Okay.
The first argument posits that collapse is failure.
Okay, so this is the idea that systems break under the weight of their own contradictions, like Rome's bloat or Easter Island's resource blindness.
Right.
It views collapse as the ultimate price of a society's arrogance, a punishment for elite detachment and moral decay.
Right. But the second argument takes a very different lens. It argues that collapse is renewal.
Oh, okay.
This is a much more evolutionary view. It suggests that old, rigid structures must die for new ones to emerge. Just as a forest fire clears the dead underbrush so new seeds can grow, a societal collapse destroys rigid, oppressive systems, like the Sanitary, so that humanity can take an evolutionary step forward.
So it frames collapse Not as a catastrophe, but as a painful but necessary transformation.
Exactly. And then there is the third argument, which feels like the most pragmatic of all.
Which is
Collapse is inevitable.
inevitable.
It states simply that all hierarchies decay. No system, no matter how powerful or seemingly immortal, is permanent. Impermanence is the absolute rule of history.
Right.
The ultimate conclusion of this debate is profound. Collapse is not the end of hierarchy itself. It is simply the end of that specific hierarchy.
Well, if impermanence is the absolute rule of history, I have to ask, is the goal of a civilization, or even a company today, to try and avoid collapse forever? Or is the true goal just to learn how to manage the inevitable decay gracefully?
That is the brilliant, terrifying question that every leader eventually faces.
Yeah.
Most leaders, much like the Sanitary Council in San Vitae, choose to fight the decay through oppression. When they feel their power slipping, when they sense the Jenga tower wobbling, they tighten their grip.
They don't let go.
No, they increase surveillance, they crack down on dissent, they heighten the rituals of obedience. They basically try to artificially freeze time.
Which only makes the structure more brittle. It turns order into tyranny. As the source material says, the question is never if a hierarchy will turn oppressive, but when.
Exactly. By trying to avoid collapse forever, they ensure that when the collapse finally comes, it is catastrophic rather than managed. They guarantee the maximum amount of psychological trauma and physical destruction for everyone involved.
And that trauma is incredibly real. We see the human cost of that brittle oppression in San Vitae with characters like Sharina.
Yes, Sharina's arc is so important here.
She experiences profound violation and trauma under the sanitary. The bodily autonomy she loses, the learned helplessness she has to fight her way out of. I mean, her journey from victim to self-author is basically a microcosm of a whole society trying to rebuild itself without recreating the oppression that just destroyed them.
And Sharina's character is crucial because she teaches Korean that alternatives actually do exist. You don't have to rebuild a rigid top-down pyramid.
Right.
Anthropologically speaking, for the vast majority of human existence, humans lived without rigid vertical hierarchy. They used mutual aid, horizontal leadership, and consensus.
But as we noted earlier, those systems require the one thing that fear destroys.
Yes, they require deep interpersonal trust.
There's a great line summarizing her philosophy. Power doesn't have to flow downward, it can flow outward.
Yes. But to achieve that outward flow, individuals have to do the hardest work imaginable. They have to tolerate the existential vertigo.
Which is terrifying.
It is. They have to integrate their fractured identities and become their own final authorities. They have to be willing to stand in the terrifying vacuum of power and say, I will not rebuild the cage.
Wow. So to synthesize all these incredible insights for you listening today, collapse destroys the structure, but it absolutely does not destroy the human need for structure.
That's the core of it.
Right. Whether we are looking at the slow administrative rot of the Roman Empire, the deforested, starved hills of Easter Island, the sudden ideological dissolution of the Soviet Union, or the fictional crumbling of the immortal Sanitary order in San Vitae, they all reveal the exact same truth.
They reveal the deep, inherent fragility of power, sitting right alongside the unyielding resilience of our desire for order. When the old world falls, humanity's very first instinct is to build a new one.
Yeah.
The grand challenge of history is figuring out how to build a new world that doesn't simply repeat the sins of the old one.
Thank you for taking this custom deep dive with us today. Spending this time to understand the sociology and psychology of power is the ultimate shortcut to seeing the invisible forces shaping the world around you.
You are now deeply well informed on why systems rise, why they rot from the inside, and the mechanisms of why they inevitably fall.
And hopefully you have a new framework for understanding the neurological chaos that follows the fall.
Exactly.
To leave you with a final provocative thought, think about the micro-hierarchies in your own life right now, your workplace, your industry, or even your social circles and family dynamics.
Yeah.
If the central authority holding that specific structure together vanished tomorrow, what would you build in the resulting vacuum? Would you instinctively recreate the exact same power dynamics just to feel safe? Or could you tolerate the existential vertigo long enough to build something entirely different? Think about the Roman senators standing alone in the ruins. The tree has fallen. What do you do with the wood?